Is this some kind of joke? The words cut through the crisp autumn air, dripping with arrogance. Bryce the cadet, with the perfectly pressed uniform, and a sneer that looked permanently stitched onto his face, held the training pistol with rigid confidence. Its cold, black muzzle was pressed against the fragile, wrinkled skin of Gordon Whitaker's temple. Yet Gordon, 87 years old, didn't react at all. He sat quietly on the park bench, hands resting on his knees, eyes focused on some far-off point beyond the neatly kept lawns of the town square. His stillness stood in stark contrast to the restless hostility surrounding him. Nearby, another cadet, Peterson, tall and awkward, shifted uneasily from one foot to the other. "Give it up, old man. Just show some respect, and we'll be on our way." The cadet tried to sound commanding, but his voice wavered around the edges. Bryce's didn't. "I said, are you deaf or just stupid?" he snapped, jabbing the training pistol harder against Gordon's temple. "I am a cadet officer at West March Military Academy. You stand when I address you." Gordon's eyes, pale and weathered like a washed-out sky, slowly drifted from the horizon to Bryce. There was no fear in them, no anger, only a quiet awareness, and beneath it, something ancient and dangerous beginning to awake. The confrontation hadn't begun with a weapon. It had begun with a thermostat. Every Tuesday morning, Gordon Whitaker took his coffee in the park. Same bench, same view of the West March Academy parade fields, where cadets marched in crisp formations. It reminded him of a time when his back stood straighter and his legs didn't ache. He had just poured a cup of steaming black coffee when they approached for young cadets, swaggering with the kind of confidence that comes from believing a uniform makes you untouchable. Bryce led them, tall, granite-jawed, and carrying a practiced cruelty in his eyes. They spotted Gordon, a thin, fragile-looking old man in a faded red windbreaker, and chose him as the morning's entertainment. "Look at this relic," Bryce announced loudly. "Probably thinks he's still fighting the Kaiser." The others laughed. Gordon didn't respond. He took a slow sip of his coffee. His silence became a mirror, reflecting their insecurities back at them. "What's that on your jacket, Pops?" one cadet asked, pointing at the small worn emblem pinned to Gordon's lapel: an eagle, globe, and anchor. The details were nearly rubbed smooth, probably came from a cereal box. Bryce scoffed, stepping closer, invading Gordon's space. "Guys like you are everywhere, wearing surplus junk and expecting us to thank you for your service." Gordon calmly screwed the cap back onto his thermos and set it beside him. "You boys should move along," he said quietly. The words, soft, unthreatening, ignited Bryce's anger. Who was this frail old man to speak to them like that, or what? "Grandpa," Bryce jeered, "going to lecture us about how tough things were in your day?" He shoved Gordon's shoulder. It wasn't a hard shove, but it was disrespectful. A line crossed. Gordon didn't stumble. The force seemed to disappear into him, as though he was rooted to the earth itself. He rose slowly, smaller than Bryce, lighter by 100 pounds, but suddenly, the other cadets felt something shift. A stillness in him that was far more threatening than shouting. "I won't tell you again," Gordon said, voicelevel.com. Bryce's rage boiled over. Being challenged subtly, or not especially in front of his peers, was unacceptable. "You won't tell me anything," he hissed. He drew the blue and orange training pistol from his holster. The other cadets stepped back in alarm. This had gone too far. "Bryce, maybe we should go," Peterson whispered. "Shut up, Peterson." Bryce pressed the pistol to Gordon's head. The entire park froze. A woman walking her dog stopped mid-stride. A man lowered his newspaper, eyes widening. No one moved. No one understood what they were watching. "Now," Bryce said, leaning in, "you're going to apologize. You're going to stand at attention and call me sir. Understood?" Gordon didn't react, but inside his mind, the present peeled away. The cold plastic at his temple became the heavy steel of an M1911. The crisp autumn air dissolved into the choking humidity of a jungle far from home. The arrogant face before him melted into the terrified eyes of a young enemy soldier, no older than Bryce, standing knee-deep in a blood-soaked trench. Gordon wasn't the victim in that memory. He was the storm, the one who held the line. And in that shattered recollection, he saw a hand, his captain's, pressing a warm, tarnished eagle, globe, and anchor pin into his palm. "They'll give you the official one later, Gunny," the captain whispered. "But this one was my father's. He wore it on Iwo Jima. You honor him by wearing it now." The memory faded. Gordon was back in the park, the pistol still at his head. Bryce still sneering. "Look at this thing," Bryce mocked, flicking the pin. "Bet he doesn't even know what it means." Across the street, Frank Jensen, a retired Army colonel, was heading to buy a newspaper. He had noticed the cadets earlier and paid them little mind. Cadets were always full of swagger. But when the pistol appeared, Frank's blood ran cold. He wasn't close enough to hear the words, but he recognized the look in the old man's eyes. He had seen that same look in Baghdad, in the mountains of Afghanistan, and in his own reflection after his third deployment. It was the look of a man who had made peace with violence a long time ago and was now being forced to open that door again. And Frank knew, with bone-deep certainty, that if someone didn't intervene in the next 30 seconds, those cadets were about to learn a lesson they would never recover from. The old man wasn't in danger. They were. Hands shaking with adrenaline, Frank reached for his phone. Not 911 local police. Wouldn't understand what was really happening. He scrolled to the name he needed and pressed call. It rang twice. McRaven, a voice, answered curtly. Marcus, it's Frank Jensen, he said, breath tight. His eyes never left the scene across the street. I'm at the town square. You've got 4 of your cadets assaulting an elderly man. One of them is holding a weapon to his head. There was a brief silence on the line before the general spoke again, his voice hard as steel. Are you sure they're mine? I'm looking at their shoulder patches right now. Marcus, they're yours, Frank replied, and you need to get down here. Not your MPs, you. The old man, he's not afraid. He's about to handle this himself, if you don't hurry. And trust me, you don't want to see how he handles it. Describe the man, General McRaven ordered. Elderly, maybe late 80s, lean build, faded red windbreaker, and he's wearing a pin on his lapel, an old eagle, globe, an anchor. The silence that followed was heavy and immediate. Frank could practically hear the gears turning in the general's mind. Frank, McRaven's voice changed tight, controlled, edged with something that sounded like dread. Describe the pin. Exactly, it's old, Frank said, narrowing his eyes. Tarnished, worn smooth. Looks like it survived more than one war. A sharp intake of breath came through the line. Stay there, Frank. Don't let him leave. I'm coming now. The call ended. Frank lowered the phone, a growing knot of anticipation twisting in his gut. Something told him this Tuesday morning was about to become unforgettable. Inside the wood-paneled office of the Commandant of West March Academy, General Marcus McRaven stood ramrod straight, the receiver still in his hand. He replaced it carefully, though the tension in his posture betrayed the storm rising inside him. Tarnished, worn smooth, old Marine. His mind raced, connecting fragments of history long buried beneath classified ink. Captain, he barked. Sir, retrieve the Level 9 clearance archives. I want the file for Operation Nightfall. Not the sanitized version, the original, sealed Sinpack records. Now the aide paled. Sir, that file is triple sealed. It requires presidential auth. Did I stutter? Captain, McRaven growled. The aide bolted out the door. McRaven turned to his secure terminal, fingers flying across the keys as he entered a series of high-level authorization codes. He typed in keywords, Nightfall, Ghost Platoon, Sole Survivor. A single heavily redacted file appeared. At the top was a grainy black and white photo taken over 50 years ago. A young Marine sergeant stared back at him, face smeared with grime, eyes blazing with an intensity that seemed to burn through the decades. Name Whitaker. Gordon callsign. GHOSD. McRaven's stomach dropped. It couldn't be not him. Not here. He grabbed his direct line phone. Colonel Davies, Major Thorne. Assemble the full command staff on the front steps. Class A uniforms. 5 minutes ago. And scramble the command vehicles. Code 1 escort to the town square. Move. He slammed down the phone, grabbed his dress cap, and strode out. His academy, his institution, had just committed an act worse than disrespect. It was sacrilege, and he was going to fix it himself. Back in the park, Bryce was drowning in his own arrogance. Gordon's silence felt like an insult he couldn't tolerate. What's the matter, old man? Lost your nerve? Bryce sneered, pressing the training pistol harder against Gordon's head. The other cadets shifted uneasily. This wasn't a prank anymore. It had gone somewhere much darker. I am a future officer of the United States Armed Forces, Bryce declared. I represent this nation's authority. You're just a meaningless old man standing in my way. I could have you detained, evaluated. You need to learn your place. It was a foreign, unforgivable reversal of honor, strength, and respect. Gordon simply watched him, those faded blue eyes filled with experiences beyond Bryce's imagination. Then the sound came, a distant wail growing louder. Not police, not fire. A high-clearance, multi-tone military escort siren. The crowd turned. 3 black SUVs, flanked by military police cruisers with lights blazing, tore down the street and screeched to a halt at the edge of the park. Doors flew open before the vehicles fully stopped. From the lead SUV stepped General Marcus McRaven. His uniform was immaculate, his chest covered in ribbons, his expression carved from pure fury. Behind him marched his entire senior staff, colonels and majors, moving with crisp, synchronized purpose. The 4 cadets froze, their blood turned to ice. Bryce felt the training pistol suddenly grow unbearably heavy in his grip. General McRaven didn't look at them, didn't look at the crowd. His gaze was fixed solely on Gordon Whitaker. He approached, stopping exactly 3 feet away. Without acknowledging the weapon still pointed at the elderly man, McRaven snapped into the sharpest salute of his career. Sergeant Major Whitaker, he thundered, voice echoing across the silent park. General Marcus McRaven, Commandant of West March Academy. It is an honor, sir. The word sir struck the air like a detonation. Bryce looked as if lightning had hit him. McRaven continued, voice ringing with reverence. Gordon Ghost Whitaker, United States Marine Corps, retired, recipient of the Navy Cross. A pause. The Silver Star. Another pause. 16 Purple Hearts. Gasps rippled through the crowd. He was the sole survivor of the Ghost Platoon during the siege of Valor, McRaven continued. He held the northern perimeter against 3 waves of assault. He defended Hill 742 for 3 days and nights with a captured machine gun and 7 rounds in his sidearm. He finally lowered the salute. Sergeant Major, your after-action reports are required reading for every officer who enters my academy. You are not a relic, you are the standard. Bryce's hand trembled as he lowered the pistol. It slipped from his fingers and clattered to the pavement. Only then did McRaven turn to the cadets. The warmth vanished from his face. You, he said, voice ice. Cadet name, B. Brees Thompson. Sir, the boy stammered. Cadet Thompson, McRaven said, each word sharp enough to cut. You placed a weapon against the head of a living legend. You climbed onto the shoulders of giants like him just to admire your own reflection. You have disgraced that uniform. You have disgraced this academy. You have disgraced the United States Marine Corps, McRaven said, his voice cold and unwavering. Whose honor this man defended with his own blood. He turned to his aide. Captain, take them. They are expelled from West March Academy, effective immediately. Process them out and escort them from the base within the hour. Their military careers end before they begin. Make sure their records reflect conduct unbecoming, in the clearest possible terms. The cadets, pale and trembling, looked as though their world had crumbled. They offered no protest as 2 stern majors stepped forward to escort them away. McRaven turned back to Gordon, his expression softening into one of deep, sincere apology. Sergeant Major Whitaker, on behalf of West March Academy and the entire armed forces, I am profoundly sorry for the dishonor you endured today. Gordon finally shifted his gaze from the distant horizon and met McRaven's eyes. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, then looked at the retreating cadets. They're just boys, General, he said quietly, his voice calm but carrying the weight of decades of experience. They need to learn that the uniform doesn't make the man. The man must earn the uniform. It was not an excuse for their behavior, but a measured observation, a lesson offered with dignity rather than anger. Gordon's hand went to his lapel, gently rubbing the worn surface of the eagle, globe, and anchor pin. For a brief moment, the park, the general, and the crowd all disappeared. He was 20 again, lying on a stretcher in a world of mud, blood, and pain. Over him leaned a face he revered his captain, grief etched across his features. The captain pressed a small pin into his hand, closing Gordon's bloody fingers around it. The official one will come later, Gunny, the captain rasped. But this one was my father's. He wore it on you. You honor him by wearing it now. The pin was more than metal. It was a link in a chain of honor. A legacy of sacrifice passed from one generation to the next, a legacy these boys had almost trampled. The aftermath at West March Academy was swift. True to his word, McRaven implemented a new mandatory course for all first-year cadets. Legacy of the Enlisted Foundations of Honor. The first lesson, a detailed 3-hour case study on Sergeant Major Gordon Ghost Whitaker. The Academy also issued a public apology in the local newspaper, acknowledging the failure in leadership and reaffirming its commitment to the values Sergeant Major Whitaker embodied. But the story's quiet epilogue occurred a month later, not in a classroom or on a parade ground, but in a fluorescent-lit aisle of a grocery store. Bryce Thompson, stripped of his uniform, now restocked shelves, eyes downcast, movements mechanical. A stained red apron hung over his frame, a name tag pinned awkwardly on his chest. He froze when a quiet voice spoke beside him. The chicken noodle soup is better than the tomato. Bryce looked up and saw Gordon Whitaker standing there with a shopping basket. No smile, no anger, only quiet authority. Bryce's instinct was to run, to disappear between the shelves, but he stayed, shame flooding through him. Gordon picked up a can of soup and placed it in his basket, looking at Bryce not as a disgraced youth, but simply as one man to another. It's a heavy burden, son, Gordon said softly. That pride of yours. It can be a powerful tool, or it can be poison. The hardest lesson we ever learn is the difference. Don't let this be the end of your story. Let it be the beginning of a better one. He gave a single, brief nod and continued down the aisle, his footsteps soft against the linoleum. Bryce was left standing alone, surrounded by cans of soup, tears welling for the first time since childhood. It was in that quiet, unexpected grace that his real education began. The story of Gordon Whitaker reminds us that heroes walk among us every day, often in the quietest of ways. If this story inspired you, like this video, subscribe to Veteran Valor for more tales of courage and honor, and share it with someone who needs to hear it.